Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be demoing a sample flow of something I built at a client. So my intro in the blog post talks a little bit about the concept of a data loader on guardrails. So this is something that you'll want to implement if you've got power users that are uploading data and you don't feel super comfortable giving them free reign to use Dataloader. And there might be some other variety of reasons that you might want to do this, but it's super cool. It uses a lot of unofficial SF actions and the MassTransactor action, which I helped develop with Matt Comer over at CapTech Consulting. So without further ado, we're going to hop right in, and I'll show you a run through of the flow itself, and then I'll show you how I built it. So the first thing we do is this will usually be pre-populated from maybe like a record page. So I'll just pick an account. So basically what we're doing here is we're basically taking a CSV file that contains a single column of essentially external IDs. It could be really anything. But just to give you an idea of something that looked like, I just made a bunch of fake IDs and put it in a custom field on this fake custom object called gas station. So you get this CSV file maybe from the company that owns all these gas stations, and you want to make sure they're all up to date in Salesforce. So you have this single column of IDs, and I've planted a few fake IDs in here to show you another little cool feature. So you would do is you would pick your account, you upload your station ID CSV file, click next, and then there's a subflow that I've built that I'll show that basically constructs your collection of gas stations and accounts. And what it'll do is it'll say, well, that's interesting. There are 3 station IDs that weren't found in Salesforce, and it spits out a little text collection for you. And then I use an action called GenerateCollectionReport to essentially show a table of IDs and stations that you're about to associate to that account. Now you could use something like data table for this, although data table tends to get pretty slow once you get past 200 to 300 records. So I probably wouldn't recommend that one. But the GenerateS object collection or generate collection report action is pretty swanky stuff. It allows you to basically put this in any rich text or HTML field, and it'll create a nice little table for you. So I'll show that one in a sec. So then, that's just basically telling you, hey, this is what was found. So you'd click next, and then I have a sample screen here to just show the differences between synchronous and asynchronous processing. And then I use the MapCollection action to basically create a record collection of all those gas stations with that new account ID. So I haven't actually committed it to the database yet. It's all living in that record collection in this flow memory. So one thing I wanted to do here to show off the MassTransactor action was to basically show how you can get double the limits with an asynchronous transaction. So I've planted a fake trigger on this gas station object. It's super terrible. Basically just takes a SOQL query inside of a loop. So it's guaranteed to fail after 100 attempts at an update. Just to show you the benefit of using this MassTransactor action, because you may not be able to do a whole lot about your technical debt of a particular object. So, there's a lot of benefits to asynchronous transactions other than, being able to transact hundreds of thousands of records, but also getting double governor limits. So I'll just show you an example here. So we'll do a synchronous transaction. This is just a traditional flow update here. So I'll try to update these 550 records. I'll click next. It'll do some thinking for a second. I have a fault connector hooked up to this step. Uh-oh. Too many SOQL queries on bad trigger. Oh, great. So let's try this again with asynchronous processing. So this will basically just go right back to the other step. So now we're going to try asynchronous. So what this will do is this will create an Apex job using the criteria we set in the action to set a batch amount and a number of jobs. So basically I show a little screen here, and I'll show you how this is done to show the status of the job. To refresh it, I just did a quick and easy little next button here. Basically just loops to the query of the Apex job and then comes back around to the same screen. So you can see 6 jobs are processed, 550 records are processed, and it was completed. And I have a nice little completion email sent to myself. And then we're done. And so you've basically now just created a more or less a data loader on Guardrails. Now there are a lot of variations on this that you can make. You could do creations, updates, deletes, all kinds of stuff that you can build into this data loader on Guardrails, as I call it. So let's hop into the actual flow. So nothing too fancy with the first screen. We just have your standard lookup field and standard upload component. I like to associate the record to the running user. That way, you could do it to the account record, but it might clog up the files tab or files section, however you have it set up on the page layout. So I probably wouldn't recommend associating it to the account. I'd probably just do it to the running user. So now here's the subflow. All I do is pass in the account ID and then the output of the file upload component into a text collection, because that happens to be the output of the file upload component. So things are going to get a little messy here. Well, not messy, just a little complicated. So feel free to pause the video if you need help here. So the first action here is pretty much the meat and potatoes of it, which is the convert CSV file to records action. This was built by Narendra Singh. And so all you really do is you specify your object, and then you basically do it again here in the API name. I'm sure he'll remove that at some point. This is probably back before we had generic S-object support. You pass in your text collection of content document IDs. It's pretty much just going to be a text collection of one. And then you can choose an output collection. I just choose to do that for ease of tracking what's going on. So remember, this has not been actually created yet. This is all just in Flow's memory at this point. So there's no IDs for this collection. So then I just do an assignment element to count up how many records or gas stations were created in this collection. And so then I do something kind of fancy here. Basically, I want to make sure that this CSV file that was uploaded contains a clean list of IDs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through all of these entries and just trim them. Make sure there's no leading or trailing spaces. So I'll just loop through that collection of the output here. I just called it records uploaded gas stations. Now naming is going to be pretty important for your sanity's sake. So then I do current item. So the current record being looped over equals a formula, which is the trimmed ID. So I'll hop into the formula field here just to show you. It just uses the trim function and then the looped variable's station ID. And then I add it to a new collection called records uploaded gas stations trimmed. So now we do a SOQL query. So in order to do that, using all of the IDs, we use 3 special actions, which I've covered in a couple blog posts. But the first one, probably one of my favorite actions on UnofficialSF, which is extract strings from collection. So you basically just specify your collection, S-object type, the field that you want to extract from the collection, in this case the station ID, your input collection, which is the trimmed records, and then this is optional. This always defaults to true, but I just put it in here for just to show you. You can dedupe those values. So if for some reason you had duplicate rows in your station IDs, you could dedupe them here. And then I actually need both of these outputs. So I output the text collection of station IDs and a comma-separated string of IDs. So in the next step, I basically add quotes to those station IDs that are separated by commas in preparation for a SOQL query. So then we run our ExecuteSOQL action using the SOQL query I have here in a text template, which I'll show you in just a sec. And then you output to a variable I called records, gas stations, and system. So here's the query I used. One thing I recommend doing when you're doing ExecuteSOQL actions, I like to store my select statement into a separate variable. That way, if you need to reuse it across different text templates or different queries in the same flow, you can. You could even store it in something like a custom label if you're using it across flows. It's super handy to do because all you need to do is change it in one place. It makes it a lot easier to manage. So we want to select the gas stations where the station ID is in the uploaded fields or uploaded IDs that we just finished quoting up. And then I basically just count up the number of records that we actually found in the SOQL query. And then, so here's where we get to the part of the flow that showed what gas stations were not found in the system. So this is actually kind of tricky if you think about it, because how do you actually compare the CSV file to what's in the system? So what did I end up doing was, first I need to know does the amount of rows in that spreadsheet match the number of records found in that query. So if they don't match, then we know I have to go look and see which IDs didn't match. If they did match, great, we're done. So how do I get that list of gas stations that didn't match, aka what wasn't in the system? So what I ended up doing was running this ExtractStringsFromCollection action again on the results of the SOQL query. So now I have two things up to this point. I have the IDs of the gas stations in the system and in the file. So using a handy little assignment, we can essentially remove all of the gas station IDs that were uploaded from the gas station IDs that were found, or vice versa, really. So that's really what we're doing. So what we're left with is the IDs that were not in the system, and we just output that to our parent flow. So at this point, we have our subflow, and you can see how much cleaner this looks when you offset or offload all that heavy lifting into a subflow. And my client, I did this because I actually had a couple flows that use this. So you can use the same flow to basically handle multiple parent flows. So the next thing I do here is I generate the collection report. This is what generates that text table. And you can actually put this in an email. You can put it in you could put it in a formula field, anything you can really think of. So you specify your two fields that you want in the table. You could put your name, anything really. In display mode, you put table, and then you give it your input collection, which is the output from the subflow. So you just do output subflow and then gas stations in system. And you can do all sorts of cool stuff like styling and things like that, but there's a whole post that Alex Edelstein has posted about that if you want to get super fancy with it. So in here, all I'm doing is just showing the results of a text collection of the ones that weren't found. So that last step here. And then the results of that GenerateCollectionReport here. So if I'm looking at this here, output, generate account collection result, and then report string. Because this is basically just an HTML text string. So here I'm running the MapCollection action. So this is actually probably going to be kind of important because you're likely to hit flow limits if you're trying to loop over potentially thousands of records just due to the element limit that Salesforce puts in place. So you really want to do that collection building in Apex if you can. Of course, try it out. And if you hit limits, then you might need to do that MapCollection action. So in this case, I have the owning account as the field I want to update, and then the account lookup component from the very first screen is the key value pair basically here. And then I just output any sort of text errors to this output, and then our output collection here is what we'll actually use to pass into the MassTransactor action. Then for debugging purposes, I just threw in another generate account collection just to show the results of the mapping. So you don't actually have to do this, but I just more so did it just to show you what MapCollection does. And then for the sake of the demo, I just let us choose between synchronous and asynchronous. You know, more often than not, you'll probably do synchronous, but if you have a lot of records to process, we're going to show the MassTransactor action being configured right here. So operation type, you know, I have a whole blog post of how this is configured. So if you can just search MassTransactor, and it'll probably be the first result in Google, but you can choose delete, update, or create. You choose your collection and your batch size. So in this case, 100. Now you'll notice that SOQL query was going to choke at 100 synchronously, but it won't choke at 100 asynchronously because of the double limits. So just keep that in mind. And then I made a little, simple body of an email and my email address here, and then the subject of the email. And so here's how you would actually just display the results on a screen. You look up the Apex job object, and the ID is the job ID, and your output is essentially just output from update gas stations asynchronously and job ID, and that's pretty much it. So on your next screen, you'll essentially just show the results of that lookup. Now, one thing, you can't really get the count of records super easily from the job, so you basically have to get that from, either an assignment element or, in this case, the subflow that I made. And that's pretty much it. Feel free to ask me any questions in the UnofficialSF post or shoot me a note on LinkedIn. Super proud of it. There's a lot of cool ways you can tackle this. At the client, I did a couple other things like showing a table of, in this scenario, it would be gas stations that are already associated with the account but not in the file, so it lets you remove them. So you can actually do two distinct updates. One is to add gas stations, one is to remove them. Lots of cool little things you can do there. So I hope you guys enjoyed it.